Hello, everyone. Today is going to be a special episode of the Alberta Roundup, not just because I'm wearing my Christmas sweater, but because we'll start off the weekly show as we normally do with weekly news because of how notable it was, with, of course, the Liberal caucus revolt and Alberta Premier Danielle Smith being all over the American news via Fox News interviews and a back and forth with President-elect Donald Trump. So to start off the show, we'll go through the Smith headlines, but we'll end the show off with a sneak peek into an article I'll be releasing over the holidays that covers some of the biggest ways the Alberta government stuck up for the freedom of its residents in 2024, and often, in fact, the freedoms of the entire country. My name's Isaac Lamoureux, your host of the Alberta Roundup. Let's hop into some of the weekly news now. So we'll start off here looking at an interview of Smith on Fox Business's Varney & Co. with Stuart Varney. Smith began by noting her concerns about the 25% tariff threat from President-elect Donald Trump. She continued by saying that even if the Liberals don't address the border crisis, the premiers are working collaboratively to do their best to ensure that illegal migrants and drugs are dealt with crossing the border. Alberta was, of course, the first province to reveal its border security plan on December 12th. The 298-kilometer border, shared between Alberta and Montana, will be monitored for drug smuggling, gun trafficking, and illegal immigration. A 2-kilometer red zone will be created. The red zone encompasses critical infrastructure and will empower sheriffs to arrest anyone deemed to be crossing the border illegally, trafficking illegal drugs or weapons without a warrant. However, Minister of Public Safety Mike Ellis said that the homeowners in the area shouldn't worry because he said that there would not be a ton of warrantless searches going on, but that someone wandering in the middle of nowhere with something illicit would be subject to investigation by law enforcement. The Interdiction Patrol Team will consist of 51 officers, 10 support staff, 4 patrol dogs, 10 surveillance drones, and 4 narcotics analyzers. The team will also monitor major provincial highways and interprovincial travel routes to and from the border. The officers will be trained to inspect commercial vehicles, which are a common vessel for human trafficking. Alberta was the first province to act because Smith said that the border enhancements are not in response to Trump's proposed tariffs. She said that she actually proposed the changes back in a July 2023 mandate letter, which discussed creating a specialized sheriff-led team to combat fentanyl and illegal gun trafficking at the Alberta-US border. She added, however, that the meeting with the Prime Minister and the country's premiers simply allowed her to accelerate the plan that the government had been working on for 18 months. Smith said Alberta will be collaborating closely with the RCMP and Canada Border Services Agency to secure the border effectively. The province is investing $29 million to create the new unit. Smith said she would not mirror Ontario Premier Doug Ford's threat to cut off energy production to the U.S. She said, quote, "Under no circumstances will Alberta agree to cut off oil and gas exports. Our approach is one of diplomacy, not threats." She added that approximately $133 billion in oil and gas is traded across the border. A 25% tariff would equal an additional $1 per gallon of gas that Americans purchase. The Alberta government is hoping to have the 24-hour operation up and running by early 2025. Smith said the following when speaking on Fox News.
We know that in Canada, as well as in the United States, we've got a very serious fentanyl crisis, and we want to do our part to make sure that we're stopping the precursors to be able to create those deadly drugs, and also making sure that they don't harm people in our communities or in American communities as well. That's what we're doing in Alberta, and we're hoping other provinces follow suit.
Smith appeared on Fox News once more, this time speaking with different reporters about the border crisis and any potential clashes among her provincial colleagues. Smith said that despite implementing her border policy before Trump's proposed tariffs, that she hears his concerns and takes him seriously. She said the following.
I'm doing my best to try to convince my colleagues that a tariff war is one we cannot win. The American economy is $27 trillion. The Alberta or the Canadian economy is about 2.7 trillion. And
Wow.
so the amount of goods that cross the border, it hurts us far more to have tariffs on incoming products and outgoing products than it does the U.S. And so we're trying to talk in terms of American interests. We know there's a lot of energy that comes down to the U.S. It means you have cheaper gasoline. We calculate a 25% tariff would increase the cost of your gasoline by $1 a gallon. We also on the East Coast have a lot of electricity that comes down. That will increase your power prices if it goes up 25%. Auto parts go back and forth across our border about 6 or 7 times. And so it'll just increase the cost of cars. And so we've got such a positive relationship, an integrated economy. We both benefit from it. And so let's address the issues that are irritants, and then maybe we can talk about a more constructive trade relationship.
Smith also replied to a post from Trump that he made on Truth Social on Wednesday. Trump was asking why the United States subsidizes Canada to the tune of $100 million a year and added that, quote, many Canadians want Canada to become the 51st state. They would save massively on taxes and military protection. I think it is a great idea. 51st state. That's what Trump said. Smith explained that Canada sends billions of raw materials like oil, gas, minerals, grain, and others to U.S. refining and factories, which are sold worldwide. She added that Canada was the United States' biggest customer by a mile. Smith said, quote, as a Conservative Premier in Canada, I believe we have two of the greatest countries on earth. We have fought and bled together in many wars and built an incredible alliance and partnership. I really hope we can strengthen that partnership throughout your presidency by securing our shared border, as you've requested, and partnering to protect our North American workers from unfair Chinese trade practices. Americans and Canadians will both benefit immensely from this. She added that the province of Alberta, which sends 4.3 million barrels of oil and gas to the U.S. daily, stands ready to work with Trump. She also gave her own sneak peek that she would be attending his inauguration in person in January. Smith's interviews and comments directly follow the conclusion of the Council of the Federation meeting, commonly referred to as Canada's premiers. The premiers met in Ontario on Monday and highlighted how they could best address their top concerns, which were Canada-US relations, energy security, and healthcare. The premiers issued a press release following the meeting. They called for greater federal consultation on immigration policy changes, including any targets and proper funding to support asylum seekers. The premiers also called on the Liberals to take bail reform seriously, address auto theft, and counter illegal gun smuggling into Canada. The release reads, quote, premiers remain concerned about illegal immigration, money laundering, and the cross-border flow of firearms, fentanyl, and precursors. The premiers highlighted that the U.S. sells more goods to Canada than to China, Japan, and Germany combined. The release said, quote, the imposition of tariffs by the U.S. would be a significant failure on the part of the government of Canada. The premiers said they would support appropriate action by the federal government in response to the U.S. tariffs, but said that the solutions need to be regionally fair. They also said that the Liberals' plan needs to include measures that tighten the visa issuance policy to present people immigrating to Canada under false pretenses. The premiers also discussed energy security. They said, quote, federal climate and energy policies must not infringe on provincial and territorial jurisdiction, impact affordability, or compromise the reliability of electrical systems. Premiers discussed the impacts of the proposed clean electricity regulations, clean fuel regulations, the draft oil and gas emissions cap, and the federal carbon tax scheduled to increase on April 1st, 2025. Lastly, the premiers called on the Liberals to collaborate as full partners in the long-term sustainability of healthcare systems across the country. Now hopping into the promised sneak peek of the article highlighting the top ways the Alberta government fought for freedom in 2024. While not necessarily an ordered list, of course, we're starting off with the Sovereignty Act when talking about the Alberta government's fight for its residents' freedoms. The Sovereignty Act was actually implemented for the first time right before the start of this year when it was used on November 27, 2023, in response to the Liberals' program designed to mandate a net zero electricity grid by 2035. Almost exactly 1 year later, Alberta once again invoked the act on November 26, 2024, to combat the Liberals' oil and gas emissions cap. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith warned that the cap would cut 1 million barrels of oil daily by 2030 and that 150,000 Canadians would lose their job, reducing Canada's GDP by up to $1 trillion between 2030 and 2040. You may remember Smith saying the following.
Alberta's energy industry doesn't just provide jobs to Albertans, but to Canadians all across our country. And it doesn't just power Alberta's economy, it powers Canada's.
Let me know in the comments if you foresee Smith having to implement the act again in 2025 and in which instances she'll need to make that move. Hopping into our next story is, of course, the Alberta Bill of Rights. Alberta's United Conservative Party is in the midst of introducing 13 bills this legislative session that are set to protect personal autonomy, property rights, and legal firearm ownership. Among the legislation is the Alberta Bill of Rights Amendment Act. The Alberta Bill of Rights has not been significantly updated since its introduction in 1972. There is some overlap between the Alberta legislation and the federal charter, which was adopted a decade later, but a notable point of divergence is the Alberta Bill of Rights' guarantee of property rights and the right of parents to make informed decisions about their children's education. The 2024 changes include the right for Albertans not to be subjected or coerced into receiving medical care, treatment, or procedure without consent. It includes the right not to be compelled or coerced into taking a vaccine. Freedom of expression rights were expanded beyond written and spoken language to include other expressive activities. Additionally, rights to acquire, keep, and use firearms were added to reinforce the right to lawful firearm ownership. Property rights were also expanded. Other bills were passed in December that strengthen parental rights, promote fairness in sports, and prevent minors from undergoing irreversible gender transitions and are expected to come into effect on September 1st, 2025. The amendments to the Alberta Bill of Rights took effect on December 5th, 2024. So the third way that Alberta fought for freedom in 2024 was actually a nationwide push. Some of you may remember this from True North Nation, when Smith called on Pierre Poilievre to follow her lead and amend the Canadian Bill of Rights to strengthen protections that may be absent in the Charter. She said, quote, "I think we should stop looking at the Charter of Rights and Freedoms as the full, comprehensive expression of all rights and freedoms we are endowed with. I think we're entering an era now where people are demanding that their government respects them and not treat them the way that they were treated during that terrible COVID era." Smith added that Poilievre could probably make these amendments if he's elected Prime Minister without having a huge constitutional discussion. The fourth way Alberta fought for freedom in 2024 was through changes to its election laws, which will soon be tested for the first time. You may remember that the Alberta government made sweeping changes to its local election laws in April. Some of the changes included the introduction of political parties at the municipal level, which will take place as pilots during the next municipal elections in Edmonton and Calgary in October 2025. Local candidates are not required to join a political party, but are allowed to do so or run as independents. However, no affiliation will be allowed with provincial or federal parties. Another reform was that all automated voting equipment, like electronic tabulators, will be prohibited at municipal elections, with votes being counted by hand. Also, voters will no longer be able to vouch for someone's identity or citizenship if they fail to produce documentation, but they can still vouch for another elector's residence. Another update will allow those waiting in line when polls close to cast their vote. However, nobody will be allowed to join the queue after the polls close. Municipalities will also be able to require a criminal record check for candidates, which will be publicly available data included in the candidate's nomination package. So the fifth and last thing I'll cover for the section on Alberta freedoms wasn't necessarily a way Alberta fought for freedom, but instead a confirmation that their policies were having a positive effect. A Fraser Institute study confirmed that Alberta was one of the most free places in North America, far exceeding its provincial peers. The study ranked Alberta 12th for economic freedom across North America's subnational jurisdictions, which are comprised of Canada's 10 provinces, America's 50 states, Mexico's 32 states, and the United States territory of Puerto Rico. Alberta was tied with Texas, Tennessee, Colorado, and South Dakota. While Alberta ranked 12th, being the freest province, the closest provincial runner-up was British Columbia in 43rd place. While British Columbia ranked decently on the freedom scale, it was more than 3.5 times less economically free than Alberta. The study measured 10 indicators using 2022 data to measure the impact of provincial, state, and federal policies on economic freedom in each analyzed state and province. The study used the 10 variables in the areas of government spending, taxes, and labor market freedom. Other variables considered were legal systems, property rights, sound money, and freedom to trade internationally. So in 2022, government consumption spending in Alberta accounted for 26.8% of provincial income, compared to an average of 30.9% in other provinces. Nova Scotia had the highest spending at 34.2% of its provincial income. Matthew Mitchell, a senior fellow at the Fraser Institute and the study's co-author, told True North, quote, "Because the government of Alberta spends less, its citizens are allowed to keep more of their money and make more of their own economic choices." He added, quote, "Alberta's top marginal tax rate is 15%, and it kicks in at a relatively high threshold of $267,724. By contrast, it is 21% in Nova Scotia, and it kicks in at $124,650. PEI's rate isn't that high at 18.37%, but it kicks in at just $53,158. Let me know in the comments if you think I missed any key ways that Alberta took a stance for freedom in 2024. Before we finish, we'll hop into our comment roundup from last week. Most of the comments focused on Jyoti Gondek winning Mayor of the Year, so we'll start off with that. At Corvette 2007 said, quote, "The magazine made a mistake. It was supposed to be for the worst mayor in Canada." Well, funny enough, based on polling, that would be a much more accurate statement, wouldn't it? At Stu7544 said, quote, "Had the bar been realistic, she would have been recalled and no longer be our mayor." That delves into a subtopic I covered in my article, so I thought I'd mention that quickly. We'll remember that Gondek was subject to recall legislation that did not meet the legal threshold. However, in seeing that the process was more or less impossible to accomplish, Smith pledged to review it. Let me know in the comments what you think that review might consist of, and if changes could be made to make it not easy but realistic that a mayor with such disapproval could be recalled in the future. At Jordan Young 8445 also said, quote, "Lived in Calgary my whole life. It has never been so unsafe." Yeah, Jordan, I'm guessing that most of us can relate because this feeling of unease and unsafeness is not just in Calgary, but across the country. Hopping into a different subject, at Jaffo49 said, quote, "With all the energy resources Alberta has, it should be a powerhouse industry of the world." So I wanted to cover this quick and also provide you with another sneak peek, so I'm planning to have a future episode of the Alberta Roundup over the holiday break to be an interview with Alberta's energy minister. I'm still getting that lined up, but keep your eye out because we're going to discuss Alberta's and Canada's energy future with Poilievre and Trump at the helm. The last comment today comes from at Faye Truhamchuk 8002, who said, quote, "Kevin O'Leary investing in Alberta is awesome news." Yeah, I agree, Faye, and this sort of ties in with the last comment. O'Leary has repeatedly complained that the electricity providers are handcuffing him in the United States. Smith decided to do the opposite and provide him with all the natural gas and electricity he could dream of, another opportunity that Alberta and Canada could take to become a worldwide leader in. Speaking on Fox News as well, O'Leary himself went on there and praised Smith for allowing him the opportunity to invest $70 billion in the Albertan economy by building his data center and the energy park to support it. So that wraps up our comment roundup and this week's show. Once again, my name's Isaac Lamoureux, your host of the Alberta Roundup. Have a great weekend. Thank you and God bless. May Alberta prosper, strong and free. And also, Merry Christmas. I hope that you all have a wonderful holidays and hopefully you get to spend some time with your loved ones.